Some of you might recall that in January of 2017, I uploaded a video titled Salted Crackers, where I described to the best of my ability why it was that I have an extreme distaste for the poster boy anime of the previous year titled Yuri on Ice. In that video, I claimed to be trying to come to terms with my disappointment with the show and getting over it as quickly as possible. But as some of you might have guessed, that didn't happen. Rather, I spent a lot of time milling over the series, and I kept coming back to it, until I tried to vent my feelings out a little bit more. After giving a warning and presenting myself as ready to talk about the series' flaws, I was encouraged to transform my lengthy YouTube comments into a complete analysis of the anime. I decided to oblige those interested parties and experiment with a different kind of video. Welcome, people of Earth and elsewhere, to the channel where the content is spam and I am Crackers. Today's spam is the first of this channel, where I take a series and look the very deepest I can into it and explain what makes it or breaks it, at least for me as a so-called fan. I give you a complete analysis of Yuri on Ice, the good, the bad, and the JJ. The first order of business is to acknowledge where this show comes from. Yuri on Ice is a passion project by the accredited Mitsuru Kubo. Let it not be said that I don't know this, or that I like to hurt people's feelings when I start talking about how the show falls through. Kubo loves ice skating. It really shows in her work, and to a point I appreciate the fire she had for this project, and still has, with the news of the second season soon to be coming. However, I know I'm not the only one who knows that she also had a much better series planned. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, what we can see most prominently in the pacing of the show after episode 4. Ultimately, that a bad choice was made when Kubo was given only 12 episodes to tell her masterpiece. 12 episodes was never going to be enough to cover the sportsmanship, characters, and stories that she had prepared, and something had to be done with it. Typically, there would be one of two answers to this predicament. Either sift through what you have and cut out painstakingly what could be considered the least important parts to bring out the best of the most important ones, or take a chance and split the story into potentially 2 seasons worth of content, focusing solely on the first half of the story and giving everything in it the time needed to make it truly applause-worthy, as it potentially would have been. In light of this, we seem to have gotten a third choice out of it, and that was to leave all aspects of the potential anime intact and cram all of the story she had prepared into the given 12 episodes, while cutting most of the content in half. The show that resulted was lackluster, despite all of its critical praise, and barely accomplishes what it set out to do with itself. As I go through this analysis, bear in mind that I am not going to treat this show as the anime as the brilliance that it could have been, but rather as the show that resulted from that critical choice made. In the end, I hope to at least emphasize where Yuri on Ice does not succeed based on 2 points because of that decision. First, the unfortunate case of false advertisement that is the series' description, and secondly, the overwhelming amount of information in the series left open to the assumptions of the audience. Now, following the basic outline I made in those YouTube comments I mentioned earlier, I'll be breaking this analysis into parts. I offered to break down several sections of the series for discussion points, and, like in those comments, I'll be beginning with the subject first requested by somebody else: the characters, starting with the most important ones and working my way down. And I have to establish first and foremost that Yuuri Katsuki and Viktor Nikivorov are the most important characters in this show, and you will have a hell of a time trying to convince me that anyone else is supposed to share that honor. Yuuri Katsuki. This guy is a piece of work. He's one of the weakest leading characters I've seen recently. He's a whiny piece of crap, and I'm not going to apologize for saying that, because guess what? That's not even what's wrong with him. Let's start with the fundamentals. Yuri is a standoffish, shy kid who has been skating at a local rink since he was very small. While no doubt talented, he starts to consider skating as a career after being inspired by his new idol Viktor Nikivorov. This is before the actual start of the series, and where we are introduced, Yuri has become a pro skater for years and has reached a deep depression in his career and is considering quitting because of it. Lo and behold, in the midst of his depression and existential crisis, none other than Viktor should show up and bring him back into skating better than ever. What I'm going to try and point out here is simple, that Yuuri Katsuki and Viktor Nikivorov are both weak characters, based not solely off of their lack of background and development, but chiefly because as individuals they barely exist. Any and every action either of them takes over the course of the series is directly related to each other, making it difficult to pick them apart on their own. This leaves Yuri in a very stereotypical spot usually held by a high school girl who is obsessed with her senpai and can do nothing without leaning on said senpai. What happens when such a character exists only to be influenced by a single other person who functions doubly as a romantic interest? She's weak. If Yuri was a girl, which would not make the show any better by any means, she would be the weakest, lamest leading female in anime to ever have existed, because she can't stand on her own, and her own desires and self-betterment are reflected only in her and her senpai's interactions. Having him be a boy shouldn't excuse this flaw. Now, I'm not trying to look down on any person at all who leans on some individual or group of people when they are in a rut and need help to get out of it. This just simply is not the case in point. When Victor is not directly involved, Yuri's character works mostly on things we assume about him instead of any real explanation or exposition. This brings us to his second characteristic, his self-confidence problem. A problem which again is solved by his direct involvement with Victor. This can be a sticky point to talk about because the way we are shown Yuri's anxiety comes across as both realistic and relatable. Again, I'll say that's not a bad thing, but this is also something that brings out a couple of rather unfortunate aspects about him that we never really get explained. Firstly, if he has anything close to the crippling performance anxiety he seems to display, there's no way that he would be able to make his way into professional sports in general. And secondly, we are never given enough information about why it is that Katsuki even stuck with ice skating long enough to claw his way into the Grand Prix final, the first time. We are never given anything concrete to work with. Yuri says he used to love skating and wants to find his love for it again at the beginning of the series, but why? What is it about skating, other than Victor, that spurred him to pursue such an athletic and performance-based career when the pressure makes him uncomfortable? Surely such a superficial motivation as senpai can't carry him through over a decade's worth of practicing and competition. I mean, at that point, it's unhealthy. We know that apparently he went to college while he was training in Detroit, but to what end is that? If skating is really so important to him, how is it he's finding the time to go to school and get a degree, and what for? Does he have a different interest? Or maybe he got there on a sports scholarship and needs to be in school so he can pay for the multiple expenses of figure skating. Did he get a degree in something to perhaps fall back on when he retires from skating? And if that's the case, why is it so heavily implied that if he does quit, he'll go back to his parents' hot springs inn and help them out there? And a tropey fallback plan that is, isn't it? The questions don't stop there, of course, but by leaving them unanswered, we are left with assuming something that takes out the intensity that is his depression and constant threat to quit. That he won't. Without a word about his drive or potential life without skating, the audience is left with no reason to believe that this character will be allowed to seriously consider quitting the sport over the run of the series, and it leaves him as a static character with only two aspects to his personality that affect him in the show. Once more, Victor remains the core of both of those things. Next, we see the only character left, even more vague in this series. None other than Senpai himself. All we really know about Viktor Nikivorov is that he's a Russian skater who has won the Grand Prix final 5 times in a row, more times not consecutively if I recall correctly, and that he's not generally a responsible person or actually has any business trying to be anybody's coach. Interesting maybe, but when the show centers around him and Yuri's coach-student relationship turned potential romance, his past is never elaborated on. His one redeeming quality at the start was his assigning the two Yuris skating routines to their opposing characters, as though he was honestly interested in seeing them both improve and grow as individuals as much as skaters. But that was thrown out the window. From the views of the characters surrounding him, we establish that Victor is a performer who enjoys surprising the audience. Surprises are his thing. That's just a fact pounded into us over the course of the series. That is the single other trait he retains throughout the series, and, on a more positive point, it cannot be traced to Yuri before the start of the show. On that note, we can't trace it back to anything specifically, but flashbacks manage to show us his performing spirit and love for the sport, so we'll go ahead and assume that it makes sense. Now, Yuri Plisetsky, by contrast, is an interesting character, but the biggest problem with him rests in the beginning of the show, which tries to sell you that he's just as important as the emotional wreck that is Yuuri Katsuki. Well, then they drop the title on us in episode 4. When the show's title, Yuri on Ice, is left as it is, It's first and foremost misleading, and I think it was 100% planned to be that way. But it could be taken about either the Russian or Japanese Yuri, or both as the show's description would have you believe. But in episode 4, Katsuki is the one that makes a routine with the song sharing that name, Yuri on Ice. I dare anyone to tell me that the grouchy Russian Yuri Plisetsky and his story even had a chance of being the focus of the show. But it doesn't really stop there. Again, some details are unwisely left open to interpretation. Yuri is assigned the agape version of On Love by Victor, and he goes to quite a few pains to harness this feeling that he's told will be crucial to his success in both the Hot Springs on Ice competition and his future as a pro skater. In a seemingly obligatory waterfall scene, Yuri comes to the realization that agape, in relation to himself, comes in the form of his grandfather. So, is it Grandpa's unconditional love and support to him? Maybe his undying appreciation for that support is what he means. Or heck, it could be both, because of how they're trying to imply it. Ideally, love does go both ways. But by the time you get to the point of reasoning that out, they really may as well have just told you the 5-second specifics of it. Furthermore, what's with this small remark about Yuri's mom? For some odd reason, she's mentioned, but never around to see him skate. Is she sick? Does she not approve of him skating? Is there some detail I overlooked, maybe? Again, a small thing, but it is one of many minute details that could have brought out more of this character. But why stop with leaving out superfluous details? After episode 4, we get a whole 3 episodes centered solely around Yuuri Katsuki, with only the smallest intervals that remind us that, hey, the other Yuri is around too. We don't see him in his first qualifying skate, or in the third competition he was featured in before the Grand Prix final. This character, who stands out easily as a protagonist on his own and is never tied exclusively to any other particular person, is only allowed to be shown performing when the true main character is directly involved. Yuri was introduced and poised as a lead, a main character, but in the end he amounts to about the importance of your standard rival, and after having seen the show not once, but twice, it's painfully clear to me that after the third episode that rivalry is heavily one-sided, diluted, and even irrelevant to the point where we get this scene between the two Yuris that under the right circumstances could have been a turning point in character for either or both of them, but has no meaning whatsoever. Especially considering the circumstance that Victor's absence from Katsuki's life for a day was what spurned this confrontation, and Victor's back in the very next scene. In essence, a perhaps alternative and definitely more effective rivalry was posed to us at Skate Canada, which again, no part of that was considered important enough for us to actually watch. Yuri Plisetsky, after intense training and work and his earnest go at winning the Grand Prix final the year of his senior debut, seems a shoo-in for the win, only to be bumped out of first place by a certain Jean-Jacques Leroy. In spite of Yuri's ultimate and history-making win at the Grand Prix in the end, it can't have seemed less satisfying, which I will get to next. Let's talk about JJ. I don't even know how I'm supposed to perceive this person, but dang, he was my second favorite character behind only Yuri Plisetsky. The guy is a total jerk. Arrogant, selfish, a show-off, you name it, he is it. He brags, he taunts his opponents, is full of himself, and honestly, it's not hard to see why the other skaters don't like being around him. I mean, who wouldn't hate having to compete with him? But I can't help but appreciate JJ and what he is. And what is that, Crackers? Well, that's the deepest and most defined character in the entirety of this show, tragically called Yuri on Ice. Jean-Jacques Leroy has been ousted by his coaches, whom we know are currently working with other skaters trying to rewrite history in their own ways. He wanted to do his own thing, so they quit on him, and everyone in the competitive circuits hates how brazen he is. But let's face facts, he was the damn best skater in the senior professional skating division. He was enthralling to watch. Some bragging rights are in order, I think, though that doesn't mean he shouldn't be taken down a peg. The way he's presented is closest to being a true rival for Yuri Plisetsky, and by the extension of his abilities and placement in the competitions, also Yuuri Katsuki. But that's never really followed up on. No matter how annoying or in the way he is to the other skaters, Plisetsky is the only one who really seems to have a bone to pick with him for bumping him out of place. And any build-up this has to the epic finale is lost on his fall in the short program of the final. A true case of assassination by plot, it works on heavy implications rather than stating outright what was going on in JJ's head and why he failed. because there was nothing physically wrong with him. He had to lose to the Yuris, because plot. So that's what happened. Here and there, he flubs up his short program for no apparent reason. He was nothing but confidence up until the second to last round, and then what? If you look closely, you get these flashes of things that could eventually compound themselves onto him and stress him out, but it really doesn't add up. Even if in the end we're supposed to assume that his confidence is just a sham to front the insecurities equivocal to even Yuuri Katsuki, there's no proper trigger for it. Maybe, just possibly, the night before, he finally came to the conclusion that none of his fellow competitors like him in the least. But there's no indication that that was enough to start the avalanche of doubt that hindered him. What I find most ironic is that here, before his first quad jump, he gets a sudden flash of, well, of all people, Otabek Alton, and what a formidable skater he is, implying that this is what causes his fall. But this makes no gosh darn sense. Why? Otabek didn't top Yuri Plisetsky's score, and JJ has beaten Yuri twice. There's no logic behind why a character shoehorned in for reasons would have any more effect on him than the stark realization that he's alone in the competition in terms of how he relates to the other skaters. You have to fail, Jean-Jacques Leroy, demands the plot. Well, he did. Yuri Plisetsky won and all that, but in the end it just screws everyone else over. Why? Because JJ was the best skater out there, and no one technically beat him. Yuri and Yuri only won because he didn't skate his best, and not because they skated better, which makes the entire victory of the competition sour, adding to the fact that somehow his extreme screw-ups didn't land him in the last place in the competition by some unspoken miracle. Instead, he gets third, like how he did back when Victor was competing. In truth, I could talk a lot more about JJ and how he is in fact the protagonist of his own more interesting show we never got the chance to see, but I'll leave this part on a logical question. Why do I like this douchebag more than the main character? After talking so much about JJ, you might be wondering how long I'm planning to talk about everyone else in the show, but it's surprisingly short, because no one else actually matters. Nope, stop typing. Say it with me. No one else matters. Nope. Nil. None. Is that enough negativity for you? Honestly, a lot of the characters who were introduced could have been really interesting, but save for the variety, they have no reason to be there. When I say that, I'm not talking about their motivations. I'm talking about their contribution to the plot and what they do to keep the story moving, which is nothing. Take Peachit. He's Yuri's hamster-loving Thai friend he met in Detroit. I have nothing against Peachit. He's funny to have around and quite endearing, enthusiastic, and he has his own plans and goals in life. But again, why should we bother to care about him when Yuri barely does? Guang Hongji and Yuri Popovich have some engaging stories to tell as they skate. But again, they do nothing to further the main story and have absolutely no effect on the main cast, save for maybe making Yuri nervous, which anybody can do. Christoph Giacometti is around long enough to act like he's prominent, but the most we can say for him is a little exposition for Victor at best. Leo is earnest, but doesn't get the honor of displaying both of his routines, much like this young Il Lee, and Mikhail Crispino's drama with his sister can't take up half an episode, no matter how fascinating their story is. Then there's Emil, who is just there to skate to dubstep music. Is there an insane amount of variety? Yes, but that would be expected from a show featuring an international competition. I'm going to be blunt here. These side characters, who have interesting stories to tell and great things in the making for them, are a waste of space and only truly serve to take up airtime. Only looking half into them and puncturing their routines with shots of the so-called main characters and their reactions does less for us as the audience and the show itself than just sticking their names and flags on their respective countries on a roster. I think that's enough for now. Even if it is more or less a very basic gloss over, I might return to characters after this analysis is complete, because some of them need much more time to do them justice. Like, hey, who's this guy? You know what? I don't know, and I don't care. But I already like him best out of all of the extras because he didn't waste my time. Kudos to him. To anyone who managed to watch this all the way through, thank you for giving me the time. And remember to comment and share and subscribe if you want to argue or see more videos like this. Alternately, you can follow SpamCrackers on Twitter to stay updated on my escapades without the threat of being unsubscribed to me at random. And with that, I'll say ciao! Be sure to return next week for part 2, where I continue my analysis and discuss